Hi, thanks for tuning in. I'm Michelle Crawford, and I'm excited to kick off a new video series today that's all about teaching you the things that I wish I knew as a watercolor beginner. So stay tuned, plus don't forget to subscribe so you can see all the videos in this series. Let's get started. Something in this universe drew you to watercolor, so you head to your art supply store, pick up some basic watercolor supplies, and get painting. Things aren't turning out quite like they are in the tutorial, so you go back to the store, pick up some books, some extra paper, and of course you're gonna get some new brushes. Things aren't still turning out the way they are in the tutorial, so you upgrade your paint, head back to the store and grab a few books while you're there, of course some more brushes, and why not pick up some more watercolor paper to practice? Well, I'm here to tell you that none of this is going to matter unless you're making sure to also work on high quality watercolor paper. Let me explain. So let's talk about why good quality paper is important, even if you're just beginning with watercolor. And in order to do that, I'm going to take you down a little journey, my watercolor beginner journey. And this right here, guys, is my very first watercolor painting. Again, I was drawn to the art. I'm honestly not quite sure what it was, but I purchased some really cheap paints and didn't watch any videos, didn't really know what I was doing. But this is the first thing that I painted. You can see I was getting quite a dry brush effect. I'm sure I wasn't using enough water. I ended up kind of just running with it and making this kind of look like wood. And then I, painted this heart in the middle. And this was my first experiment with watercolor. And honestly, after doing this, I felt really, really good. This watercolor paper came with this like really cheap set. I think I bought probably on Amazon. But it's like super thin paper. It's definitely like a cellulose paper. Not the best, honestly, for watercolor. But I was proud of this, and so I kept going. So then I watched a few tutorials, tried a few things, and honestly, I was really unimpressed. I felt really great about this, and the more I learned about watercolor and started to use more water in my painting, the more frustrated I got. And the perfect example I have to show you is this, probably about my fourth or fifth painting. I don't know if you're familiar with Em Lefebvre or her abstract poppies watercolor tutorial. I'll see if I can put a link in the description. But this was my first attempt at her watercolor poppies tutorial. And I think by this time I even had some better quality paints, and I still had kind of this awful pad of paper. Paper seemed kind of expensive to me, especially as I was like just starting out and wasn't quite sure if I was really gonna like watercoloring. But I remember feeling pretty good about this until I finally realized and tried out some better quality paper. And so I redid this, and I don't think this is Arches or anything like that, but I know it might be Winsor Newton. I think that was the first kind of decent quality paper I tried. But just look at the difference. I remember following her tutorial the first time. I'm, doing the same things with my brush, and I was getting a very, very, very different result, and a result that, honestly, looking back, I'm really unhappy with. I didn't understand why, I was getting such a poor color quality, and my colors weren't bleeding. And of course, didn't really know too much about it, what I was doing. But even at about the same skill level, trying the same tutorial on a different quality paper with, I think, the same quality paints, you can see quite a difference. And so this Winsor Newton paper was 100% cotton paper. We'll talk about why that's important. And it's also a correct thickness for watercolor. And so I was able to get, I think, a significant improvement, though I would love to try this tutorial again today. This was probably just maybe 3-4 months into my watercolor journey. And so I was able, even though I was still learning how to use my tools and different techniques, I started to be able to create things that I was feeling much more proud of. And I think a lot of this had to do, we tend to think, oh, we need better paints. They're more pigmented. And I did upgrade, I think, to the Winsor Newton Cotman set by this point. And so better quality paints. But it really was having decent quality paper that helped me learn to love watercolor and helped me learn to understand what I was capable of. Now, that does not to say that you can't create beautiful art on cheap paper. I think that there are certain papers that bleed and bloom a lot more than others. The ones that are made out of different materials other than cotton. But if you're just kind of trying to learn how to do the basics and you just want to get a nice flat even wash, or you just want to try this color bleed or this wet on wet technique, honestly, paper is really going to matter. So let's get into it, all about watercolor paper. So when I am talking about kind of budget-friendly watercolor paper, there's so many brands out there. This is not an exhaustive list, but some of the things I've been able to find, like at my local craft store, but things that are pretty inexpensive. So like this little watercolor pad, it is actually a decent thickness. It's 140 pound or 300 GSM, which is about the thickness you want to have for watercolor paper. So the first thing you should always look for is that it is at least 140 pound. This paper is going to buckle a lot less and move. So if you're painting with watercolor and you realize your paper's warping a lot, that's going to have to do with the thickness of the paper. So that's at least starting off great at a high quality thickness. But this is $3.99 at my art supply store. Of course, we've got Canson and Canson XL. These are pretty popular watercolor papers. I think they use them a lot at Let's Make Art. But again, if you're looking for a lot of blooms and hard edges and like kind of exploring that magic of like watercolor textures, like these papers actually do work really well for that. I also tend to use these papers a lot, like small scraps of them when I am painting, just to test out colors on another piece of watercolor paper before I put them on. So these are still 140 pound, so they're the right thickness. But again, these are going to be like pulp-based papers. They are not cotton, and that's going to be the next big important thing that we look for. Same with these. Another few brands I've been able to get is Artist Loft from my craft store. Still good thickness. And then this is the Let's Make Art watercolor paper. I believe that this is really was designed for their type of art, which again is all about accepting those different bleeds and blooms and explosions that happen with watercolor. So again, these types of papers have their purpose, but if you are trying to recreate some of the tutorials and things that you see online or other artists doing, and it's just not working for you, especially if you're trying like a wet on wet technique, then before you upgrade your paints or your brushes, I honestly think that you should think about upgrading your paper. Now, you don't have to get arches. There is a step or many steps in between this and arches, which is pretty high quality and expensive watercolor paper. But the most important thing that you want to look for with your watercolor paper is, first that it's the right thickness, at least 140 pound or 300 GSM. That's the typical thickness. But you also want to look to get paper that's 100% cotton. The cotton paper is going to absorb more water. It's going to stay wet longer. It's going to allow you to get more of those more gradual blends and bleeds, and it's going to help your watercolor flow. And then also, if you're doing a lot of wet on wet, this is going to stay wet longer. A lot of the budget paper will dry really quickly after you've placed down a wash, and so maybe you're trying a wet on wet textorial, you like lay down a light wash in a flower and you try to go drop in some color, and it's just not moving around. The paint you've already put down is dried. That's going to be because you're not using 100% cotton watercolor paper. So some kind of medium grade brands that are still fairly inexpensive are the Strathmore. Honestly, Strathmore, it's decent paper. It's the right thickness. It's 100% cotton. I tend to rip my paper with my tape a lot when I use Strathmore. Maybe I'm a little bit hasty with that, but so far this has been, a decent quality paper. If I'm doing like practice sheets and things like that, I'll happily use something like Strathmore. Also, there's a brand called Stonehenge or Legion papers, and I've actually used a few of theirs, but I've also got like some really small sample size books that they sell at the craft store. Those are also great for like testing out colors and things. But Stonehenge, very similar to me with the Strathmore. It's 100% cotton. This is 140 pound. Tends still to like maybe rip a little bit with my tape, and so I just try to be like real gentle with that when I use these. But these have been actually really, really great to use. And actually, another brand that I love is Etchr, and I will show you one of the sketchbooks next, but kind of in the medium category, I have their watercolor paper, their watercolor blocks. I do love to paint on watercolor blocks. One of the most important things you're supposed to do to prep your paper before you start painting is you either stretch it, which I don't usually do, but the other thing that you should be doing is, if you're not going to stretch your paper, to tape it down to a surface, and then you'll have tape to remove, or you could paint on something like a watercolor block. So a watercolor block is just a pad of watercolor paper. It's been glued on all four sides, and usually there's a little slit somewhere to insert your palette knife. This Etchr block actually has this entire fourth side open, and so you can slit a palette knife in there or some type of object and just run it around and remove the sheet after you've painted. That keeps your paper nice and flat. I will say this Etchr paper, what makes this kind of more medium grade is the fact that it's 50% cotton, which is a little bit different than their sketchbooks. And then this is also, I believe, 140 pound. I will notice that since a lot of them will have just a slit on the block, and that helps keep it more flat. I've noticed with the Etchr block that I still need to get some warping on that side, so I've even taped it down sometimes when I'm painting it. But if you want to try out a block, I think that this was pretty economical as far as price, and a great paper to use. So these are kind of some like medium grade papers that I have tried, but if we want to talk about my favorite watercolor papers, I've done a little bit exploring. I just showed you the Etchr watercolor block. This is the Etchr sketchbook, and so this is actually 100% cotton, which remember the block was only 50% cotton, so it is the perfect makeup. This paper in this sketchbook though is a little bit less thick than the paper here. This is 300 gram or 140 pound. This is a little bit less, and so keep that in mind, but it is a great texture, and you can see I was doing some tutorials in here, some landscape tutorials, and this has been a great sketchbook to use where it acts a lot like the higher quality watercolor papers. Again, it's not as thick, and so you'll see even when I do wet on wet, I'll tape a border around, but a lot of people recommend these. I really like it. It's got this nice canvas cover. I will say it took me a while before I decided to buy a sketchbook, but I was really happy with this purchase. So let's talk more about 100% cotton, 140 pound, high quality watercolor paper. So again, some of the paper can get really expensive. Something like Arches can be, depending on the size of the pad or block you're buying, anywhere between 30, 40, up to 60, 70, 80 US dollars. So I was wanting to practice more on 100% cotton watercolor paper that was going to stand up, and I found this company, B Paper Company, and this I purchased on Amazon. I've purchased a few of their packs, and this is actually really great quality paper, and it's pretty budget friendly as compared to a lot of the other brands, so that's one that I recommend. And then I actually haven't tried this yet. I bought this sample pack, Baohong sample pack. I'm probably not pronouncing that right, but Baohong is the name of the paper company. Some artists in groups I was following were trying this out and had highly recommended. So I did buy a sample pack of this just to try out their different types of paper. There's several in there. So that is an option. This brand came very highly reviewed. The first 100% cotton high quality watercolor paper I did try was the Winsor Newton Aquarelle. And so I will say I really liked this block. It had a great texture. The other thing you're looking for is the texture of the paper. You're going to see either hot pressed or cold pressed. If you want to get that typical grit in the paper, that typical kind of look of a watercolor, then you want to go with the more textured cold press paper. It's just how they press the paper, and it's more rough when they do it as a cold press. Hot pressed paper is going to be much smoother, and some of them are, just as smooth as, drawing paper. But I really liked this one, and honestly, I don't think I have any complaints about this paper. I did try a couple of their other products, the Winsor Newton Watercolor Aquarelle, even though it says, the same type of paper, and these are both cold pressed. They're both 140 pound. I believe that these books, you can see there's a little chart inside here. Some of them are cellulose papers and some of them are cotton. So this book right here, these bound sheets are actually cellulose paper. So if you've tried out maybe a couple different types of bindings on your Winsor Newton paper and you didn't get the results you're expecting, this is cellulose. The block, though, all the blocks are 100% cotton. So just saw that information right inside the cover of this paper. And so it looks like there's spiral bone pads and this other grommet pad is going to be that cellulose, or their postcards and some of their sheets of paper. But they also have the blocks, a spiral journal, and then sheets of the 100% cotton as well. And they show you different hot press, cold press. And so, again, have really enjoyed Winsor Newton paper. It's kind of the first decent paper I tried, and I have really no complaints about it. But another brand that I got really excited about because of course, we're going to talk about Arches. But Arches is a really high quality paper. I think it's my favorite paper to paint on. Many artists love it. We all know that it's great paper and that it also comes with a price tag. But there's a brand that I found that I feel is just as high quality, but it's got quite a bit less of a price tag. I wouldn't say that these are cheap papers by any means. Like, you want to, again, invest in your art. As a new watercolor artist, you may be thinking, oh, I'm just practicing, I'm not worthy of the good paper. But let me tell you, if you don't try painting on good paper, you might be missing out on something that's going to help you really fall in love with watercolor. So don't be shy about practicing on this paper. Get some sheets, get some of the maybe mid-grade paper. Just give yourself a little bit of grace. But Paul Rubens is a company that I feel the quality of their papers is fantastic. I think it's, again, just as high quality as Arches. I really like the format that their papers come in. So I've got like this little sketchbook here. Also, of course, I love painting on watercolor blocks. I've got two of them here. One is just got a paper cover. But they do a lot of these like leather covered books, and I just love the pink on this. There's an abstract I was trying out a while back. But Paul Rubens has ended up being probably my favorite paper because, one, it's really great quality, and it's not bad on the price tag is not too much in comparison to Arches. And so I will say that when I do buy Arches paper, I'm usually looking for some type of a sale, or I don't buy like really large blocks of the paper. I do have a lot of really smaller blocks that honestly I think it's easier to practice on smaller sheets of paper. When you have like a big, huge sheet of paper, I think it can be intimidating. But I've got 3 different kinds of their paper here. The 140 pound cold pressed, which is, or hot pressed, I'm sorry, which is Very smooth. It's very smooth to the touch. You're not getting that typical like grain and dips inside the paper. That's that texture that you're going to have with the cold pressed paper. So if you rub your hand across the cold pressed paper, you're going to feel it's slightly textured and most typical for watercolor. And these are 140 pound. They also have this, a lot of professional artists, if they're selling professional artwork, will go for a 300 pound paper. So this is their cold pressed paper, but it's twice as thick as the paper that I just showed you. And you can see there's only a few sheets in this block. It's really, really thick. And the reason why you would use this is that you would have, with paper that's this thick, almost no buckling at all. In your paper's not going to warp or anything as you add water and things to it because the paper is so thick. But I will say, when I've used this paper, I have had to use a lot more water and paint because it is so thick. It absorbs that water a lot more. But if I am kind of painting something to frame, I'll use the arches. But honestly, I use, and here's just a pad of their paper as well, so you can buy it in sheets. But try not to shy away from using it. Again, when I buy it on sale. I'll, buy one, get one free, or a website might be having a sale, or sometimes I always look at my local craft stores. They don't always have it, but if they do and I've got a coupon, I'll buy some. But you don't have to spend a fortune to have great paper, but it will improve your artwork. So my tip for you today, this is something I really wish I knew before I started watercolor painting, was skip the junky paper, go straight for 100% cotton paper and just explore. Give yourself the freedom to explore. Thanks for watching. I hope you like this video. If you enjoyed it, that helps get my videos out to more people. Plus, if you want to check out future content, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and check out the next video. Happy painting.